All right, so thank you everyone for joining us. This is our second session of the day and our sixth week of our Coach Socialization series. So thank everyone for attending and who's been checking out our YouTube page. So that everyone's aware, we will post all of our sessions on there, and you can view all of our previous ones as well to keep up to date. So last week we had Angela on here to talk about relative energy deficiency in sport. So she gave kind of like an overall background of what REDS is, and today we're going to be diving deeper into kind of some strategies with how to manage any athletes that might be experiencing REDS, and then talking about symptoms as well. So Angela is a dietitian at Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic, and one of her students that's the correct term, correct? One of your students, intern will be joining as well and speaking about REDS. So if you have any questions, feel free to use the chat box or just raise your hand and we'll open up for a formal Q&A at the end. So Angela, you can take it away from here.
Perfect. Thanks, Kirsty. So thanks for joining into part two. If you've missed part one, it is recorded. So we went through a lot of the diagnostic tools, things that we'd be looking for in assessment and recognizing and diagnosing relative energy deficiency in sport, where we know it's not just in those weight-making sports or body image aesthetic sports. It really is across all different sports between male and female. So we're going to delve into a little bit into disordered eating disorders now. Sometimes the root of the deficiency can be related to either disordered eating or clinically diagnosed eating disorders. So we're going to get into a few different types of clinical eating disorders and what sort of signs and symptoms to look for in those scenarios. And then the question I always get from coaches is, whoa, Angela, what do I do with this? And really, we're not meant to be psychologists. So in most of these situations where you are dealing with an athlete who is in REDS because of an eating disorder, and that really requires a multidisciplinary team approach with either family, if the athlete is underage. It involves the coach, it involves dietitian, psychologist, and sometimes even the strength and conditioning or physiologist as well, so that we're all on the same page in what the plan is with the athlete moving forward, getting them back to health and then back to performance and training. So we'll look at some of those things. When I was going to have this session live in February, and we had a snowstorm that day too, which is why it was canceled. I actually printed off a lot of the resources. I know not environmentally friendly, but they're sitting on my desk at the Sports Center right now. So I'll flip back and forth. I have a couple up on my screen that I'll stop sharing and flip to those. If anyone's interested in any of the resources that we have that we'll mention as we go through today's session, just private message me and I can forward those off to you. So before I hand it over to Morgan, I just kind of wanted to preface a bit of what kind of eating disorders we'll be talking about and delving into a little bit. Binge eating disorder is exactly what the name suggests. And these all have clinical criteria in order for us to determine whether we're actually dealing with an eating disorder or whether it's just disordered eating. And I think I finished off last session with that sort of continuum of disordered eating. It could be anywhere from healthy eating to disordered or eating disorders. And then there's this bunch of kind of gray area of eating behaviors or disordered eating behaviors in the middle. And I see athletes kind of switch between all along that spectrum throughout a training year, depending on what events they're trying to peak for. So they may not always exist in an actual clinically diagnosed eating disorder or disorder eating. They may kind of flip through. So it becomes a little more complicated to recognize and to diagnose athletes, and whether they're just eating uber healthy, which Morgan's gonna speak to one of the specific types of eating disorders that we can get a little clouded again in our assessment of, you know, is this athlete just a true healthy eating athlete, or are they taking it just that next step further where it almost becomes an obsessive behavior? We have avoidant restricted food intake disorder. Yes, this is an actual disorder where they're restricting foods and food groups maybe for whatever reason. Don't like how it feels in my tummy. I hear milk isn't good for me. Whatever the reason, they're avoiding certain foods, mostly food groups. Rumination disorder. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with this, and this is not a pleasant description, but it's basically chewing, swallowing, regurgitating, and then re-chewing that food for the sense of that taste, that flavor, without getting the extra calories in. Pica, I learned of this when I was actually pregnant. I guess we were told when I was pregnant that this is a common disorder in pregnant women. They crave the earth, so they crave non-food items like dirt, soil, things like that. I personally haven't seen that within an athletic population, but just so you know that it is a disorder that exists. Then we have all of this other, what we call other specified feeding or eating disorders. So they may not quite fit that diagnostic criteria for maybe anorexia nervosa or bulimia nervosa, but they have similar symptoms that exist in those disorders. So anorexia nervosa, again, their weight is not within their range, or they have a quick weight loss leading to cardiovascular effects on the heart. We have bulimia nervosa, again, maybe less frequent than actual bulimia nervosa, where they would be purging more than one time a week for more than 3 months. So you might see that at a lesser degree. Again, that would be grouped into that other specified feeding or eating disorder. Purging disorder, again, they may purge in different ways. They may purge by virtue of excess exercise. So beyond their regular training, typical training requirements, they're doing extra beyond that. And there's another term for that as well, and it's called anorexia athletica. Very common, again, in athletes where they're actually using exercise as their method of reducing calories. Night eating syndrome, sometimes I say I have that because I stay awake and watch the news and end up maybe binging on some stress foods, comfort foods over the last week or so. But typically this is an uncontrollable binge in the evening, or waking in the middle of the night and binging on food or comfort foods. Unspecified feeding or eating disorder, again, they don't meet those overall criteria for a specific eating disorder, so they kind of group it in that category. There's another, and I alluded to this earlier, and I'm going to hand it over to Morgan to kind of talk to you a little bit about what orthorexia is, and then again some diagnostic sort of or symptoms that we would be looking for with an athletes.
Okay, thanks, Angela.
Tell me when you want me to click.
Of course. So thanks for Angela for prefacing the orthorexia. So this is actually a disorder in which athletes might be obsessed or unhealthily obsessed with healthy food. So this is kind of like a preoccupation with food and diet, and usually it's kind of driven by body image or actually trying to fit into eating what is actually healthy. And a lot of them kind of start to feel like guilty or actually are very obsessed with actually eating the right foods. And this can actually come out in a number of different ways, which I think in the next slide, there's a couple of examples. So we know it's, again, exclusion. So sometimes it can be driven for health reasons, but it can get driven further. So if someone's actually looking into just getting health, or it doesn't necessarily mean that they have orthorexia. And as well, eating disorder for orthorexia is not necessarily caused by other eating disorders or obsessive compulsive disorder. So some of the examples for orthorexia, so a lot of it is like phobic avoidance of foods. So they usually have a perception of things that are super unhealthy, or a refusal to eat certain foods. So some athletes might feel like, oh, well, carbohydrates or bread is like considered very unhealthy. So they might completely cut out certain food groups, or just refuse to actually add those into their diet, purely on the basis of thinking that they're unhealthy for them. And then usually if they actually break this, this actually causes severe emotional distress to them, in some cases some self-harm. So a lot of feelings, if they do break it, it would be guilt, shame, a lot of self-loathing sometimes if they perceive that they've eaten something that is unhealthy. And a lot of times they try to fix this by being purification. So they try to compensate by having increased exercise, or actually, eating different foods of using laxatives, diuretics, just trying to purify or get rid of the food that they thought that they ate that was unhealthy. And again, it has to be persistent failure of meeting appropriate foods. So again, restricting certain foods, not eating certain foods, and a belief that certain other foods may be more superior to others. So sometimes they can actually follow certain restrictive diets even though they might not have a medical condition. I've seen some athletes cut out certain dairy or even gluten foods even though they might not have celiac disease or gluten intolerance or lactose intolerance. Like I've seen an athlete, wouldn't eat pasta, but they'd eat a muffin. So that's kind of on the line of kind of orthorexia, a disordered sort of perception of food. Other examples of orthorexia are insisting in food and health benefits, so even if it's on the contrary. And also a very distinct feature of orthorexia is an interference of social functioning. So they'll refuse to actually, they'll impede with certain social events because they won't want to eat the certain foods or actually take part of eating unhealthy food. So some of the practical applications that we have for orthorexia is it's, again, an IST kind of standpoint. You got to have your dietitian involved, your coaches, and it usually has to be breaking around the obsessive compulsive disorder. So it can involve like medication management, anxiety reduce, mostly because in orthorexia, there's a lot of fear-based and driven. Again, like fear and worry about eating the wrong foods or maybe gaining weight, or just in general of not eating the right foods. And again, it involves nutrition assessment and counseling to make sure that they're actually fully supporting their nutritional needs and adequacy. And also psychological prevention, which is called exposure and response prevention, and acceptance and commitment therapy. I think. So again, earlier, orthorexia, like we want to promote healthy food. Our society is very much geared towards like eating healthy, which is positive, and it can actually help for performance and allow enjoyment of food, and actually be healthy allow people to feel healthy. When it starts to actually become more pathological nutrition, it actually can be degrading for some athletes. So they can view food more as, if they're viewing food more as something to control, this is when it actually starts to become more disordered, or exclusion again, or motivated by the need to control body or anxieties. This is when it starts to become more pathological.
Yeah, I have a quick story. I'm always full of stories. I guess I've been around a long time, seen a lot of people, a lot of athletes. I had a mature athlete come to me probably about 4 or 5 years ago, and was striving to get his body fat percentage as low as possible. He wasn't a competitive athlete. He was just a recreational athlete, which in turn changed a lot of his dietary habits. So much so that over the course of the 4 years I saw him, he went from eating processed on the run takeout food to making his own everything. So it was almost paranoia on anything that was prepared, right down to ketchup. He would convince himself that anything that was pre-made had additives and it wasn't clean. So that clean eating or detox, all those types of things should be trigger or red flags that, I mean, again, we may choose to eat organic some things than others, and for our own beliefs or even religious beliefs sometimes. But when it becomes that over the top and it includes everything, and it actually, and for this gentleman, it was actually excluding his social, or it was restricting his social life. As Morgan mentioned, he wasn't able to be able to go out, enjoy. He would stress about social gatherings around food, which was, food is a comfort. Obviously, it's a social part of our lives, and that's something we've always grown up with. To have food as strictly fuel. And we relate that to athletes because really that's what it is for them. They move away from that social aspect and comfort and emotional part of eating. And for him, it became quite obsessive to the point that I couldn't help him anymore. So really, it is something to be on the aware, on the forefront of, and watch for some of those signs. Healthy eating is great, but when I ask a client, what's their favorite comfort food, and they say spinach, I love spinach like the next person, but it probably isn't my go-to, comfort food. So be aware of some of those signs. Do you want me to flip to the next?
Yeah, and just being aware of sometimes it can be driven by perfectionism as well. So if they're very obsessive of logging, or if they're constantly tracking their food and they feel bad about certain foods, like, oh, I had a bad day because I didn't eat healthily, is a very big determinant of orthorexia. I think, yeah, next slide would be good. So this is just, I think, the Bratman questionnaire, and it's just a quick questionnaire for a tool assessment that you can use to see and assess if your athletes may potentially have orthorexia. It's a bit diagnostic, well, not a diagnostic tool, just because it's not actually a full diagnosis yet, but it's a good way to indicate.
Sorry, I was just going to say, sometimes we might feel uncomfortable, and I mentioned this in the last session too, getting comfortable with the uncomfortable. Sometimes, especially when I have interns and we're here in my clinic with clients, and we kind of sense there's something, but to ask these questions, it creates a lot of anxiety even within us as sports science professionals, that we might not want to ask those questions because we don't want to know the answer. What do we do with that information when we get that, right? So I actually did a mindful eating session last night with one of our national teams, and I got them to do a little online questionnaire, and they were able to kind of answer the questions as best they could, and they weren't being judged. I couldn't see them. It was just the answers kind of coming in as they truthfully answered. There's lots of ways we can facilitate these types of questions, but maybe start getting comfortable with, asking, when you are on the road and you're traveling with your athletes and you see them eating, ask some positive, and we'll get to some of those kind of questions a little bit later too, but kind of, run through these in your mind and ask yourself, would I be comfortable with asking some of these questions of my athletes?
So some of these are just the questions of the self-test. Again, it's kind of challenging your own beliefs. So sometimes we ourselves also have this kind of embedded with us, and that's just part of like society at the moment. We have, in the Western culture, we're very focused on fat phobia. We're very afraid of gaining weight and fat. And we also have quite an underlying perspective of healthism. We're very concerned about health. We want to be healthy. We don't want to gain heart conditions or other diseases. So it's very put forth and very prominent in our society to improve in our life. These are just some further other questions that you can ask yourself. Just again, testing your beliefs and also seeing that maybe what your perspective is on healthy eating.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I did a whole session with coaches on just checking in with our own biases. We'll get into it a little bit later in the session, but I think that's really important because and it might not be, intentional. We're doing it because we think we're helping our athletes, but the way we maybe talk about food or even our own personal, eating styles and behaviors can absolutely influence our athletes. So really getting in tune with, do we have biases? And there's tons of research done on psychologists and dietitians. And actually I did a session on biases within an IST, because how many times do we hear, maybe a strength and conditioning coach saying, wow, you look really good today. And that athlete might have been struggling with food and disordered eating and was trying to maybe lose weight. So that gets turned right around into, I lost weight. People are noticing I'm better. I'm stronger. So we have to really be careful with how we phrase some things, and we'll do a little session on that in a sec. Okay.
Take over with that?
Yeah.
Over to you.
Perfect. So it's not an easy fix. It's a long road. I think we've come out of the kind of mindset that, once you have an eating disorder, you always have an eating disorder. There's been a lot of good research, both in athletics and non-athletics, that, we can overcome disordered eating and eating disorders, but it's a multi-step approach, multifaceted and disciplinary approach as well. So I'm not going to run all through this, but obviously rehabilitation, if we suspect something, we do a thorough assessment like we talked about last week, and then we decide whether or not it's sort of outpatient or inpatient. I've had the unfortunate incidents of having to admit or request the admission of adolescent athletes in the inpatient clinical eating disorder program. That's not fun, but we can't. Obviously, health comes first. So knowing when we need to make those calls and involve physicians, etc. So a lot on the rehabilitation process, and that's about obviously balancing food, including foods, working really closely with a psychologist. I've done that in the past where, you know, maybe we have benchmarks and we're both on the same goals each week, and then measuring those goals against successes within that. It gets a little more tricky when you're dealing with an adult athlete who has then the choice of whether or not they admit to an in-house program or an outpatient program. So if they're not at that stage of ready to change, and you're not currently working with a psychologist to help that athlete through that process, that can go on for years, and hopefully we're not still training during those times. It's unfortunate because that's their go-to, but really it's not in their best health to do that. So when we look at education, again, looking at nutrient density of foods, not just calories, not just counting, like Morgan said, logging their overall intakes. It's about getting them in tune with, I have a great book, it's called Intuitive Eating by Evelyn Trivioli. She's a dietitian. It's a great workbook on how to just get in tune with those hunger and satiety cues, instead of being told I've got to eat this much grams of carbs and protein at this time, and they're just constantly thinking of food as fuel and not as enjoying and savoring all those other sensations that go with food, and getting those hunger and satiety cues. And then it's about being autonomous. So it's not about being monitored and meal plans, and giving them the confidence that they can choose based on their own cues, whether or not they know they're meeting their overall needs, and getting in tune with those red signs and symptoms when they know they're not getting enough, then they need to readjust. So again, that could take years, but it just gives a little feel for, it's a long road. So what can we do now as coaches? I love when I get the call, Angela, I'm suspecting something. Here's what I'm seeing. I don't really know how to deal with it. So can you, like, if you have a good relationship with the athlete, can you deal with it? And that's okay too. You're not meant to be, I'm not meant to be a psychologist. You're not meant to be psychologists either. But we can start by maybe feeling comfortable with asking some of those questions that Morgan went through, and I'll throw some more up here in a second. Again, just a bit of a tiered approach in terms of how we, it's hard to get to the conversations before we actually kind of delve into what sort of environment we're dealing with. Maybe it's a parental thing. I've seen that a lot. Again, right here in my clinic, it's a very clear picture that there's strong beliefs from the mom or the dad, or maybe an older sibling, that is being imposed on the athlete. So again, it's about evaluating that overall environment, creating a safe environment for the athlete to approach you or another member of the IST, and not feeling like I'm going to get kicked off the team because of this. I know I have something wrong, and I need to kind of keep it under the rug. At this point, we're not even, looking at body composition assessments. We don't want to add another number to already a head full of obsessive compulsive number control issues. So that's taken off the table. If we do have previous body composition assessments, then we can at least get that fat-free mass and be able to determine whether or not they are at a low EA or low energy availability per kilogram of fat-free mass. If we don't have it, we don't have it. That's fine. We'll assess with the other measures that we do have. I'm going to flip to the next slide. So this is a great acronym that has come from another psychologist that works at our center in Pacific. And she says we need to walk before we run. And I love that. So the acronym is WALK, watch for signs and symptoms of REDS. You guys know that probably inside out right now. My bubble slide, I call it. Then we need to start asking questions and assess risks. You, me, other IST members. Listen without judgment. We're a helping profession. As dietitians, as coaches, we want to help our athletes peak, meet their optimal potential. So it's always, always, and maybe an issue that we want to impose sort of our personal maybe thoughts or feelings, and that's where we need to kind of remove those as best we can. Keep safe. That's really what it is. We're trying to maintain their overall health, and then obviously seek support. So there's a whole course on motivational interviewing, and I always recommend my interns to take a course in this, because we're not taught this in nutrition 101 in university, and it takes a long time to be able to kind of get to develop those skills. So when we're talking about motivational interviewing, we're talking about things like open-ended questions, getting them to feel that you're on their side. So tell me how things would be different for you if you were so when I have a athlete that says, well, I really want to be, 65 kilos and I'm 70 right now. And I say, well, where is that number coming from? Again, how would you feel different? Explain to me what that would look like for you, or how things would change if you were at that weight. Well, I don't know. That's just what maybe coach is telling me, or maybe that's what another athlete who's successful is at that weight. So digging a little bit. What do you think would happen if your weight doesn't change? So very realistic. They're not coming to me to lose weight, and if they are, we're going to maybe explore the option that it might not happen right away. We need to get your energy availability back up first before things can start to change. And I'm not going to guarantee you that your weight's going to change or when it is. How does that make you feel? They may say, to heck with you, I'm going to do it on my own. And then they're obviously not ready. What are the most important things to you? What impact does your weight have on these things? How do you feel about changing your exercise or eating behaviors? If that makes them a little anxious, nope, they're very strict in that orthorexic mind. Again, not ready to change. What are the good things about eating healthier, losing weight? So getting into some of those ideals that they may be placing on themselves, or where that goal, that drive for change or body composition change is coming from. And what concerns do you have about losing weight? So again, really open-ended. We need to have protocols in place. So I'm gonna flip to, I'm just gonna stop sharing my screen for a sec. And then I'm gonna go to, I have way too many things open, right? Yeah, I know. So if I go here, so I'm hoping everyone can see this now. So this is what we call the Relative Energy Deficiency Clinical Assessment Tool. It's still waiting to be validated, but it is a great tool that I've used with athletes.
I'm going to interrupt you for a second. You can't see the tool.
It's just like we can only see the bar, like the.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Oh no. Pause share. Screen is paused. Shoot, I don't know what to do. I'm seeing it on mine, but you're obviously not. You're just seeing a little bar on the, like my Google Chrome.
Yeah, like we just see Moodle 233.msvu.ca.
Oh no. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, I can resend that. Let me try this. Can you see it now?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Technology at its finest. I learn something new every day about Moodle, or about Zoom. So yeah, this is something that I've used in the past as more of a, I guess, a guiding agreement between athlete, IST, coach, to kind of get us all on the same page of what we're looking at in terms of, and we went through some of the diagnostic criteria last week with different blood work. If it's a female athlete, obviously menstruation. So once we kind of assess that they are in reds, we then look at them in terms of whether they're at high risk, whether they're at moderate risk, and what that means in terms of return to play or training. And unfortunately, it's not a nice conversation to have, but again, as long as they're training at regular volumes and intensities, that degree of deficiency is going to remain and probably even get bigger, whether they're fully further restricting and further imposing extra activity and exercise. So high risk, basically, we're saying no sport participation. That's red light. So if they are clinically diagnosed with an eating disorder, and we've seen extreme losses in from normal body weight, that would be an indication that they would be at a red, what we call a red light. Moderate risk, we see some of those, again, symptoms of reds. Maybe we have some body fat measures that we know are increasing. Maybe we have a good fat-free mass, and we can do the assessment of LEA, or low energy availability, under 30 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass. We know the menstrual cycle is, or they are amenorrheic, so more than 3 months. Maybe they haven't started by the age of 15. We've got maybe some bone density. I don't usually get that information. We're not as lucky as some of the other centers to have a DEXA scan. And then we see some, again, symptoms of disordered eating. That would be an indication that they're at moderate risk. So we would then try to reduce or modify training until we see some regains in some of those diagnostic criteria. Green side, good to go. We're screening for all of those things, maybe once a year or biannually with the athlete, and we have no issues. So, I encourage, a REDS assessment on any athlete that we feel is in deficiency. But there's also another tool. I'm not going to flip back to it because I probably won't get it. Is the low energy.
Is Angela still there?
I think she froze for a little bit.
Okay. I thought it was my Wi-Fi, because mine was going in and out at some point too.
Oh, there she is.
Okay. We'll blame it on the bad weather. Like my Wi-Fi was dipping in and out. I was nervous we were going to lose the call. Okay, Angela. Okay. I have no idea.
I was on a roll. I was talking to myself.
All right. Well, you can take off where you were at.
Okay. So you're just seeing nothing right now. I'm going to go back to here, see if this works. Man, that was crazy. How long? What was the last thing you heard from me? Return to play model?
I think so.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. We'll pick it up. So yeah, the return to play model is there. It's a great tool for coaches to help discuss with the athlete that it's something that's a validated or awaiting validation tool, that it's not just something that they decided they should do. And then it helps the athlete know that it's more of a subjective evaluation. And then this is great. I've done this in the past as well. We have benchmarks every 2 weeks where we would like to see the athlete improving in terms of health and some of those biomarkers. And then we create a contract and everybody signs it. So it's here, it's ready to go. And it lists all the requirements right there, and you can have an appendix of your own as well. So this is a great tool. I am more than happy to share that document with anyone who isn't familiar with it. All right, see if this works. Okay, so that's the REDS cat. Again, I alluded to a little bit of kind of checking with their own biases. I've got tons of tools on that as well, and it's a fun session. When I was going to do the coaches session live, we were actually going to do a couple of fat phobia biases, and just check in and see. Sometimes it's alarming. We may not realize we have these biases because we work in sport and we're so driven to high performance that some of these things are kind of they're hidden. So what assumptions do I make based on weight regarding a person's character, intelligence, professional? These are some of the questions that the questionnaire goes through. How do I feel working with people of different body sizes? What types of feedback do I give to, this is more from a clinical health professional standpoint. Does this feedback encourage healthy behavior change? How do I address the needs of various body types of athletes? And do you do that in a group setting? And how is that taken amongst other athletes? Am I sensitive to their concerns? And do I treat the individual or only the condition? Really important, because individuals come with and athletes come with a ton of other stuff that we don't see, right? I had an athlete come to me once, and she was at the point she was broken. She was in REDS. We kind of suspected it, but then it was just boom. It was just like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was very sudden, and not realizing she had all this other stress and other things kind of factoring in that we didn't know. So I encourage you to challenge your own attitudes and beliefs, and check in, like, how many times do we comment even on your own maybe spouse or partner or friend, like, wow, you really look good. What have you been doing, right? Commenting on appearance. It's huge. It has such a huge, profound effect if someone is in that disordered frame and thoughts. How often do you make negative comments about your own body, right? We're our own worst critic. We're so self-critical. How often do you say or assume that someone is looking good, or comment that you don't wear certain clothing because it makes you look fat? Oh, I hate that because it just makes, right? Instead of, I really like that pair of pants because it has pretty flowers on it, whatever. Or how openly admire the appearance and character or personality of actions of all sizes, right? We're really easy to judge, and in sport, that's what we're driven to. We're constantly dissecting, comparing numbers, and so I challenge us to kind of get out of that while still optimizing athlete performance. So yeah, what we say, wow, you're looking great. Looks like you've lost weight. And what a disordered athlete might hear is, well, you didn't look as good before. That's what I'm hearing that coach is saying to me. And that obviously if I've lost weight, then thinner must be better. And that you're always evaluating how I'm looking or my body. So I must continue to do what I'm doing if it's disordered. The alternative might be focus on effort, consistency, strength, actions. Wow, I can really tell how dedicated your workouts have been lately. Even though you might know they might be changing body composition, or maybe they haven't been. Maybe there's nothing physical that's any different about them, but we need to start commenting on effort and dedication and passion and all of those things. Your consistency is really admirable. Your energy seems really great today. I always ask, how are you feeling today? How do you feel? Right? And you might get that's a real open-ended motivational interviewing question, but it's a good one and you can get a lot. So we know what not to say, I hope. And then how do we rephrase those? So, oh, you'll grow out of it. Oh, you're going through puberty. Don't worry. It's just a thing. And that's not comforting to, an adolescent athlete. Why? Or it's easy. Just eat something. Like, you don't have to be afraid of dairy. Just try it. Simple solutions don't work because, again, they're disordered thoughts, and there's multi factors into why they're not eating those foods. So I see you're thinking more clearly. It's great. You have a good sense of humor. Your concentration is really improved. Your personality is really starting to come through now. All those things are kind of ways that we can kind of rephrase. I love this. I spent a whole, again, session just on this is what we say, clean eating or, food as fuel, good or bad foods. It really challenges their thoughts, or reinforces their thoughts, I should say. And then what they hear, nutrition is something that can be done. It always has to be perfect. I've got to be on all the time. Dieting behaviors, again, destructive patterns. I think there's again, Ellen Slater has a whole book on how to rephrase the common statements that we might make in terms of body composition or image. So start asking questions. That's my biggest thing. If we can start getting comfortable, again, if I had more time, we would actually do some role play and start, engaging in some of these conversations that might not be comfortable, to get you feeling more comfortable. So what can we do now? I think, be a positive role model when it comes to food. I know it's hard when we're eating as a team and we're on the road, and, even I get those comments from coaches sometimes. Well, I really understand why so-and-so is struggling, because I saw what he or she ordered when we were out on the road. And that might've been a one-time thing, and maybe it was filling a comfort or emotional need at that time. So there's, again, things that we might not see. So, try to rephrase or talk to somebody, like if you have access to a dietitian, to kind of bring some of those things up if you're uncomfortable. Promote open communication. I see a lot too with athletes judging each other. So again, they're traveling, they're on the road, and they're making comments about one's choices. I even had it in my own family last week. My mother-in-law said, "You eat the biggest plate of supper for a little person that I've ever seen." And I was like, I'm going to use that. Thank you. And then in my next presentation, and it just went over my head. But I don't have disordered eating. If I had disordered eating behaviors, that would have totally flipped me into a restrictive behavior the next time I ate, or I just wouldn't eat around her again. But I was proud of that, so I was okay. Promote positive self-esteem, help athletes feel good about themselves, right? Support a safe space. I love this. We have safe sport. I love that. And Manitoba is a great leader in this area. They create a safe sport policy where athletes should feel open to be able to communicate some of these thoughts or feelings that they may be having around food. And then use the resources. We've got lots of them. Again, not going to go into all of them, but I think knowing your IST, being able to reach out, fostering that open environment is just huge. And the way we word, or the way we complement behaviors, and maybe even not so great behaviors, how do we deal with those So let's start to change the culture. I've yet to see an NSO or an IF develop national policies around REDs. Like, I'm struggling with that right now with one sport where it's very clear. We have an athlete who's been in REDs for 4 years and we have nothing to go by. We don't have a policy that says if you are in yellow or if you are in red, you cannot compete. You cannot train until you get to here. So lots of IST right now across the COPSA network are advocating for that. So that's hopefully soon to come. So it takes a little bit of pressure off, again, that personality conflict. Well, coach just hates me, and that's why, they're restricting my training. It's not about that. It's about health of the athlete. Lots of resources up there. You can have access to my slides. Have at them. If there's anything on there that like I said, that you think you would benefit from in terms of self-questionnaires or clinical assessment tools, by all means, reach out and I'd be happy to share them. How am I doing for time? Oh, 7 minutes.
Great. Thank you, Angela. And thank you, Morgan, as well. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to unmute yourselves or use the chat box. Wait a couple seconds for that.
Yeah, I do have a quick question if you're available. So for me, in my experience with community coaching, I find it's more that we typically have, at least in our area, some kids that are overweight. And in our case, what it was is I had a athlete that I had last year who came back this year to tryouts after not seeing her for about 8 months. And I realized that she had lost a lot of weight, but I was hesitant to make note of that because I wasn't sure if it was done in a healthy way or if it was done due to unhealthy behaviors. So I guess just could you provide maybe some ideas as far as coaches, a proper way to approach that situation? Because we never know if it's due to, maybe anxiety that has, provoked a lot of these unhealthy behaviors, or if it was, healthy, hard work in the meantime, because I wanted to make sure I wasn't promoting unhealthy behaviors, but I may have also overlooked, the work that this athlete put in the off season, right?
Yeah, again, that's a tricky line, right? I think, again, if you're even if you're sort of promoting or not promoting, but giving validation for even performance. So that can be that can be translated into, well, coach is saying my times have gotten better. I've gotten PBs and because I've lost weight. So even if we're complimenting, so that's what I was looking for, even if we're complimenting on performance, that can be translated. So not to even comment on the weight issue. And yes, they might have done it healthfully. Usually if it's a quick weight loss, it's a bit of a red flag. So they've either done something drastically, whether it's, again, extra work, reducing intake, like something. So there's a bit of a benchmark in terms of REDs, that if they've lost over 10% of their body weight, or a minimum of 10% of their body weight within, I think, a month, that could be an at-risk situation. So it's hard. And you're right. There are athletes that might have to lose, to lose weight for their sport. It's just, how do we approach it? It's tricky. I had a coach a few years ago that had a benchmark again of like a number, and we were like, well, where does the number come from? So I actually worked with the coach to say, you know what, we've got a lot of data on this athlete, and really this athlete had PBs at this weight, which was higher than the weight that the coach had him on. And so it's kind of, if you can, get some of those performance data, then hopefully you can take the number of like the weight off the table and just focus on where is your sweet spot for peak performance. I don't know if that really answers your question. It's like it's a tough because we want to compliment the athlete on performance too, but sometimes in that, just if it is a disordered situation, they would automatically translate that to, that's because of the weight loss, wasn't because of the work I put in. So maybe commenting on, I know I can see how much harder you're working, it's showing, that kind of thing. And then look for other signs and symptoms. I'm not seeing any more chats. It's not my chat.
Oh, I have a question if there's still time.
Yeah.
Okay. So I coach swimming, and when I took over my team about a year and a half ago, their training load increased a ton just based on the previous coaches and then what they had hired me to do. And so I don't talk to my athletes a ton about food, other than I realized pretty quickly that what they were used to eating before wasn't going to be enough. So we always talk about like making sure they're eating more, and especially in and around competition, just to replenish and recover. But I'm wondering, I haven't focused too much on like the nutrition value of like how you put together what they're eating. It's more just like put anything in you that like you're comfortable eating, just so they are getting something. Now they're understanding the amount they need to eat. How would you transition that conversation from like just eat more into like, now let's kind of think about, because most of them are pretty good at eating healthy, but you know what I'm trying to say? Like, I'd rather them eat anything than go through a 5-day competition on like a piece of bread in the morning.
Yeah. So I mean, that's what dietitians do. We translate it into more nutrients. So nutrients for performance. So I talk about more like the different types of foods that would provide what kinds of energy, quick, slow, same with proteins, quality proteins, and then they can start kind of building. I always say that if they're not including, 2 to 3 of, I'm still in a food group world in terms of sport nutrition. So other than the Canada's food guide, but if we can think of like 2 to 3, sometimes even 4 food groups at every time they eat, then they're going to get a balance of those nutrients, and those nutrients are going to work better together than if they were just to have a banana or so. Yeah. But I love that, just being able to talk about, just eat, right? Like, we're going to put out another book and it's just going to be just eat, people. Just be comfortable in eating what you're craving, right? But yeah, relating it more to, the nutrients that provide best energy before competition, after competition, in between events. We would relate it more to the nutrients per se than amounts or total energy or calories.
Okay.
Does that make sense? It's not something that I would expect a coach to be able to kind of pick up and do, but I really commend you for being able to just encourage them that they need energy and can come from all different areas.
Yeah, no, that makes sense for sure. I like that approach if I were to like try and step it up a notch with what we're talking about.
Yeah, reach out. I'm sure I've got some handy little resources or charts that would help too. So it's usually, I mean, honestly, from what I see, other than like disordered eating and eating disorders, sometimes the athletes are just in a slump because they just don't realize how much food they need.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really challenging to get that much food in when they're in a normal world and busy in school and work and training. So
Great.
Sorry.
Oh no, I was gonna say there's a question in the chat box. So how do you deal with the athletes doing all the work needed, but their parents keep negatively commenting on their physique when the athlete's weight/physique is okay?
If you could be a fly on my walls in here with parents and athletes. If they're underage, I'll ask the permission of the parent after the first couple sessions to if I can meet with the athlete on my own, and then it's a whole different picture. and usually they'll be okay with that because they sense that there's some headbutting with the parents, and a lot of times it's the parents' unfulfilled athletic dreams of their own that they're living through. I mean, I know you guys don't have to, it's not news to you, you know, parents are probably one of the worst in our struggle for regaining you know, positive behaviors. But sometimes I have to have the conversation with the parent, talk about uncomfortable situation, right? Sometimes after I open up or get the athlete to open up to me on their own, then I would invite the parent back in and get the two of them. And this is, again, more psychological training and services. But if they can then start talking to each other, the parents actually don't realize sometimes what they're doing. That's the crappy part. And then when they do, it's a bit of an emotional kind of thing. But that's happened quite a few times, but it takes a while to get to that point, and usually involving family counseling. Yeah. But don't be afraid to approach the parent too, right? Like I've had to do that before as well. I might not see them again, but.
Hey, great. Any other questions, comments? Okay. Well, thank you again, Angela and Morgan. That was great. And for those who weren't able to catch the first session, we do have it on YouTube. So if you just want to rewatch that, and maybe it will help you fill some blanks if you didn't watch it before watching this session. But we will be posting all these on YouTube. And our next session is tomorrow afternoon at 12 p.m. So a mental performance consultant named Tina will be coming on to talk about how we can adapt our home environments for a better workout. And then on Thursday, we'll be having another Canadian Sports Centre Atlantic staff member named Darren coming in to talk about resilience. So a variety of topics this week. Definitely encourage you to check them out, and check out our YouTube for our previous sessions as well. So thank you everyone for attending, and we hope to see you in our future sessions.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.